There's something almost magical about holding a piece of ancient pottery, feeling the weight of centuries in your hands, tracing the curves shaped by fingers long gone. But what if that clay could whisper secrets of not just one civilization, but two? Picture this, a single pot, fired in a kiln thousands of years ago, bearing the unmistakable marks of two distinct cultures. The way the clay was folded, the pigments chosen, even the fingerprints pressed into its surface, all of them tell a story of collision, exchange, and unexpected harmony. This isn't just pottery, it's a time capsule of human connection, a silent witness to moments when worlds collided and left their mark on something as humble as a vessel. Across deserts and mountains, from the banks of the Nile to the valleys of the Indus, archaeologists have uncovered these extraordinary artifacts, pots that defy the boundaries we've drawn between ancient civilizations. They're not just objects, they're puzzles waiting to be solved. How did techniques from one culture end up in the workshops of another? Were these exchanges peaceful trades or the result of conquest? And what can these shared firing methods tell us about the people who shaped them? The answers lie in the details, the way a glaze shimmers with a foreign mineral, or how a handle echoes a design from hundreds of miles away. These pots are more than clay. They're maps of forgotten journeys, proof that even in antiquity, borders were more fluid than we think. So let's dig deeper, not with shovels, but with curiosity. Over the next few minutes, we'll piece together how two civilizations could meet in the heat of a single kiln, leaving behind clues that rewrite what we know about the past. You'll see how a pot can be a diplomat, a teacher, even a rebel challenging the stories we've been told about who influenced whom. By the time we're done, you'll never look at ancient pottery the same way again. Because sometimes history isn't written in scrolls or carved in stone. Sometimes it's waiting to be found in the curve of a bowl or the color of a glaze, where two worlds became one. The story of pottery begins with fire, simple, primal, and transformative. Picture the earliest artisans shaping wet clay with their hands, then placing their creations into the flames of an open pit. This was more than craft, it was alchemy. The heat hardened the clay, turning fragile earth into something that could last for millennia. But here's where it gets fascinating. While every culture discovered this process independently, the methods they developed were as distinct as their languages. Some used bonfires, others built underground chambers, and a few even harnessed the wind to stoke hotter, more controlled flames. These weren't just technical choices, they were cultural signatures woven into the very fabric of daily life. Take the ancient Egyptians, for example. Their kilns, fueled by the abundant reeds along the Nile, reached temperatures high enough to create their iconic blue faience. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, the potters of the Indus Valley were perfecting something entirely different. Enclosed kilns with carefully designed air vents, allowing for precise control over the firing process. These weren't just tools, they were reflections of the landscapes and resources around them. So when archaeologists find a pot that combines, say, the thick, burnished walls of Anatolian pottery with the delicate painted motifs of Mesopotamia, it's like stumbling upon a conversation frozen in time. How did these techniques travel? Was it through trade, migration, or even something as simple as a potter marrying into another community and bringing their skills with them? The real magic happens in the details, the tiny clues hidden in the clay itself. A pot fired in an open pit will have a different texture than one from a kiln, with telltale marks from uneven heating. Some clays, when exposed to specific temperatures, change color in ways that reveal their origins. And then there are the glazes, A single pot might bear a cobalt blue borrowed from one culture and a glossy lead-based finish from another, proof that someone somewhere shared a secret. These aren't just accidents of history, they're evidence of something profound, that even in a world without maps or internet, ideas could travel as far as the people who carried them. What's most striking isn't just that these techniques blended, but how seamlessly they did. A potter in ancient Greece might have admired the way Phoenician traders sealed their amphorae, adapting the method to suit local tastes. Or a Chinese artisan inspired by Central Asian designs could have experimented with new mineral pigments. This wasn't imitation, it was innovation born from curiosity and respect. And that's the heart of the mystery. These pots aren't just objects, they're testaments to the human instinct to learn, adapt, and create something new from the old. So the next time you see a piece of ancient pottery, look closer. The real story isn't just in the shape or the color, it's in the fire that forged it and the hands that dared to try something different. One of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries came from a dusty hillside in southern Turkey, where researchers unearthed a shattered storage jar bearing decorations no one expected. On one side, bold geometric patterns typical of local Hittite artisans. On the other, delicate spirals echoing designs from faraway Crete. This wasn't just a broken pot, it was a bombshell. For decades, historians believed these two civilizations had minimal contact, separated by the vast Aegean Sea. Yet here was proof they'd not only traded goods but shared artistic ideas, perhaps even techniques. The clay itself told the story. Analysis revealed a blend of local minerals with traces of volcanic ash found only on Crete, suggesting the pot might have been shaped in Anatolia but glazed by someone who'd worked with Minoan masters. Halfway across the world, in the ruins of an ancient port city near modern-day Pakistan, archaeologists made an equally startling find. A stack of broken bowls buried for over 4,000 years showed something extraordinary. The lower layers featured the thick, utilitarian designs of the early Indus Valley civilization. But as they dug higher, the shards changed: thinner walls, finer craftsmanship, and suddenly unmistakable Mesopotamian motifs. Someone had been teaching new methods here. Chemical analysis revealed why. These later pots contained bitumen, a tar-like substance Mesopotamians used to waterproof vessels for long sea voyages. This wasn't random imitation. It was a deliberate adaptation, proof that Indus potters weren't just copying foreign styles. They were solving problems with borrowed knowledge. Perhaps the most poignant example comes from a dig in Spain, where a single elegant vase told a story of cultural fusion born from necessity. Decorated with both Roman laurel wreaths and intricate Celtic knotwork, it was fired during the tumultuous years of Roman expansion. At first glance, it seemed like a simple export until researchers noticed the clay matched local Iberian sources, not Italian imports. The truth was far more interesting. Roman soldiers had occupied the region, but instead of imposing their tastes, they'd commissioned local artisans to blend both traditions. Fingerprints preserved in the clay revealed the potter's hands were smaller than typical Roman craftsmen, likely a woman from the local community. This vase wasn't just art. It was diplomacy in clay form, a quiet compromise between conqueror and conquered. What makes these discoveries so revolutionary isn't just their existence, it's what they force us to reconsider. For centuries, history books painted ancient civilizations as isolated worlds, developing in proud isolation. But these pots tell a different story, of back and forth exchanges, of techniques passed hand to hand across deserts and oceans. A single shard can upend decades of assumptions. When archaeologists found Chinese-style celadon glaze on fragments in East Africa, it didn't just prove trade existed, it revealed a maritime network stretching halfway around the world, centuries before Europe's so-called Age of Discovery. Every time a kiln site yields pots with out-of-place designs or materials, we're reminded the ancient world was far more connected and far more curious than we ever imagined. The real lesson here isn't about pottery, it's about people. These artifacts show us that cultural exchange isn't some modern invention. It's as old as civilization itself. Whether through trade routes, migrations, or the simple human desire to learn something new, our ancestors were constantly borrowing, adapting, and improving upon each other's ideas. That Hittite Cretan jar, it suggests apprentice potters might have traveled between kingdoms. Those Indus Mesopotamian bowls, they hint at merchant ships carrying more than goods, they carried knowledge. And that Roman Celtic vase, it's a reminder that even in times of conflict, creativity finds a way to bridge divides. These pots aren't just relics, they're the original social network, proof that innovation has always thrived where cultures meet. Imagine a bustling marketplace in ancient Samarkand, where merchants from China unroll bolts of silk next to traders from Persia hawking spices, while a potter from Mesopotamia demonstrates his wheel-throwing technique to curious locals. This wasn't just commerce, it was a live workshop of cultural exchange, and pottery was often the star pupil. Trade routes like the Silk Road didn't just move spices and textiles, they carried entire artistic traditions in the holds of camel caravans and ships. A single merchant's crate might contain Greek amphorae packed with olive oil, but also the invisible cargo of how those amphorae were made, the curve of the handles, the mix of the clay, even the temperature of the kiln used to fire them. Take the Phoenicians, master navigators of the Mediterranean. Their ships were floating classrooms, spreading not just vibrant purple dye, but also their signature pottery techniques across coastal cities. Archaeologists have found nearly identical ceramic jugs with the same tapered bases and red slip glaze, from Lebanon to Sardinia, a span of over 1,000 miles. But here's the twist, local potters didn't just copy these designs, they remixed them. In Cyprus, artisans blended Phoenician shapes with Egyptian-inspired lotus motifs. In Carthage, they adapted the glaze to suit local clays, creating a whole new style. These weren't knockoffs, they were collaborations across centuries, proof that trade wasn't just about selling goods, it was about sharing knowledge. The maritime Silk Road tells an even more dramatic story. When a shipwreck off the coast of Indonesia yielded a trove of 9th century pottery, researchers were stunned. Among the shattered celadon plates from China were jars with unmistakable Persian cobalt blue designs, except the clay was Chinese. This wasn't just a mixed cargo. It was evidence of Chinese potters experimenting with Middle Eastern pigments, likely after seeing samples brought by traders. The kilns of Changsha even began producing export ware, tailoring designs to foreign tastes. Arabian calligraphy appeared next to Buddhist symbols, and shapes shifted to suit the dining habits of Persian merchants. The result, a single pot could be a menu of global influences, fired in one place but dreamed up across continents. But perhaps the most surprising exchanges happened where you'd least expect them, in the humblest of objects. Consider cooking pots from Roman Britain, found with traces of olive oil and garum, a fermented fish sauce beloved in Rome. These weren't imports, they were local imitations made by British potters trying to recreate Mediterranean cuisine. The very act of cooking foreign dishes demanded new kinds of pots, shallower pans for frying, lidded pots for slow simmering, and with them came new firing techniques to withstand higher heats. Trade didn't just change what people ate, it changed how their food was made, right down to the clay vessels themselves. What's extraordinary is how fluid these exchanges were. There was no ancient patent office stopping a potter in Taxila from using a Greek kiln design, or a Mayan artisan from borrowing a Honduran polishing technique. Trade routes became neural networks crackling with creative energy. A single innovation like the kick wheel, which let potters spin vessels faster and more evenly, could spread from Egypt to India within generations. And sometimes the influence went both ways. Chinese porcelain's translucent quality so dazzled Middle Eastern potters that they spent centuries trying to replicate it, eventually leading to the development of tin-glazed pottery in Baghdad, which later inspired Italian majolica. The loop of inspiration and adaptation never truly ended. This interconnectedness challenges the old idea of civilizations rising in isolation. A pot shard found in Kenya with Chinese glaze isn't just an outlier, it's a breadcrumb on a trail of human curiosity. When a Viking trader buried in Sweden was found with a ceramic cup from the Byzantine Empire, it wasn't merely a status symbol. It was proof that even in the early Middle Ages, a cup could travel farther than most people ever would, carrying with it the fingerprints of artisans separated by languages, religions, and thousands of miles. Trade routes didn't just move goods, they moved minds. And in the clay they left behind, we can still trace the echoes of those conversations the moment a potter in one land saw something beautiful from another and thought, "What if I tried that?" In the rugged foothills of northern Afghanistan, archaeologists brushing dust from broken pottery made a discovery that rewrote the artistic history of Central Asia. These weren't just fragments, they were cultural collisions frozen in clay. The Greco-Bactrian kingdom, a crossroads of empires where Alexander the Great's Hellenistic legacy met the steppe traditions of Central Asia, produced some of the most visually striking hybrid pottery the ancient world ever saw. Picture a wine vessel shaped like a Greek amphora, its curves echoing those made in Athenian workshops, but decorated with leaping stags and spiral motifs straight from nomadic Scythian art. Or a delicate perfume bottle bearing the face of Dionysus, yet glazed in turquoise hues favored by local artisans. This wasn't mere imitation, it was reinvention. The magic lay in the kilns. Greek potters arriving with Alexander's armies brought their signature techniques: black figure painting, precise wheel throwing, and kilns designed to reach temperatures high enough to produce their iconic red and black gloss. But the local Bactrian artisans had their own expertise, honed over centuries: airtight underground kilns that conserved heat in the harsh climate, and mineral-rich clays that took on vivid colors when mixed with cobalt from nearby mountains. When these traditions merged, something extraordinary happened. Greek forms gained bold Central Asian colors, while nomadic designs acquired the refined symmetry of Hellenistic art. A single drinking cup might feature the Greek god Hermes on one side and a Bactrian camel caravan on the other, fired in a kiln that combined Greek temperature control with local insulating techniques. Perhaps the most revealing finds come from Ai-Khanoum, a Greco-Bactrian city where excavators uncovered pottery workshops with layers of experimentation. Early layers show Greek potters struggling with local clays, their familiar designs cracking in the drier climate. But later strata reveal solutions recipes where local potters taught them to mix in crushed limestone for stability, while adopting Greek methods for finer detailing. The breakthrough came when someone had the idea to decorate Greek-style plates with scenes from Central Asian epics, using a hybrid palette: deep Greek blacks and reds alongside vibrant Bactrian blues and golds. These weren't just functional objects, they were statements of identity, proof that a new culture was being born, one sip, one plate at a time. What's truly remarkable is how these hybrid techniques spread. Shards found along the Silk Road show Greco-Bactrian influences popping up in distant markets, from Persian courts to Chinese border towns. A wine jug excavated in Samarkand bears the hallmark of a Bactrian potter's kiln but sports handles shaped like Greek theatre masks, a design that likely traveled along with the actual plays performed in Hellenistic theatres dotting the region. Even the clay tells a story of exchange. Neutron activation analysis reveals some vessels contain minerals from multiple regions, suggesting potters were blending materials from Greek and local sources to achieve specific textures or colors. But this fusion wasn't just about aesthetics. The Greco-Bactrian pottery revolution solved practical problems too. Greek-style thin-walled cups, prone to shattering in Central Asia's temperature swings, were reinforced with thicker bases inspired by nomadic leather vessels. Meanwhile, local storage jars, traditionally bulky and unadorned, gained elegant Greek curves that made them easier to transport on camels. Every adaptation spoke to a deeper truth. When cultures collide, the best solutions often come from borrowing, then improving. A humble water jug might seem insignificant until you realize its design encapsulates centuries of accumulated knowledge. Greek geometry meeting Bactrian durability, fired in a kiln that symbolized cooperation. The legacy of this fusion outlasted the kingdoms that created it. Centuries after the Greco-Bactrian cities fell, potters along the Silk Road were still using hybrid techniques born in those workshops. The distinctive turquoise glaze developed there resurfaced in Persian Minai ware, while the practice of blending narrative scenes with geometric borders influenced Chinese blue and white porcelain. These pots weren't just products of their time, they were catalysts proving that artistic innovation thrives where traditions intersect. Holding one today, you're not just touching clay. You're holding a conversation, one that began over 2,000 years ago between a Greek artisan and a Bactrian potter, each teaching the other how to see the world differently. When Spanish ships first landed on the shores of the Americas, they carried more than swords and crosses. They brought an entire tradition of pottery making, from the kiln designs of Seville to the lead glazes of Toledo. But what happened next wasn't a simple takeover. Indigenous potters with thousands of years of their own ceramic heritage faced these new techniques not with surrender but with creativity. In the pueblos of the American Southwest, where ancestral pueblones had perfected the art of hand-coiling vessels without a wheel, artisans began experimenting with something revolutionary: European glazes. The result, pots that kept their traditional shapes, the rounded ollars for storing grain, the shallow bowls for grinding corn, but now shimmered with metallic greens and honey-colored finishes borrowed from across the ocean. Take the story of the Santo Domingo Pueblo in present-day New Mexico. When Franciscan friars established missions there in the 17th century, they set up workshops to teach European pottery methods, hoping to replace pagan designs with Christian imagery. But the Tours and Kiers potters had other ideas. They adopted the glazing techniques, yes, but used them to enhance their own symbolic language. A storage jar might feature the new glossy finish, yet its surface would bear the same spiral motifs that had honored the water serpent for generations. Even the colors told a story. The deep black of traditional Pueblo pottery, achieved through smothering fires, now mingled with the iron-rich reds introduced by Spanish colonists. These weren't compromises, they were declarations, a way of saying, we'll take what's useful, but we're still here. Further south, in the Maya highlands, the collision of traditions sparked even more striking innovations. Indigenous potters had long created intricate polychrome vessels using natural pigments and slips. When Spanish tin glazing techniques arrived, the Maya didn't abandon their methods, they hybridized them. Archaeologists have uncovered plates from the late 16th century that layer Spanish-style white tin glaze beneath traditional Maya blue paint, creating a luminous effect unseen in either Europe or the pre-Columbian Americas. The designs were even more telling. Geometric patterns from Maya cosmology framed scenes of Catholic saints or local animals painted in a European chiaroscuro style. These objects weren't just art, they were negotiations in clay, a silent dialogue between conqueror and conquered. Perhaps the most poignant examples come from the Andes, where Quechua potters under Inca rule had mastered the art of creating ceramics without kilns, using open fires and carefully controlled oxygen levels to achieve stunning blacks and reds. When the Spanish introduced their enclosed kilns, the results were unexpected. Quechua artisans began producing mestizo-ware vessels that combined the fine, thin walls made possible by European kilns with the symbolic precision of Andean iconography. A colonial-era jar might have the sleek profile of a Spanish wine vessel, yet its surface would tell an Andean story. Spanish grapes rendered in the shape of sacred maize, or Christian crosses woven into the chacana, the Inca cross that represented the three worlds of their cosmology. The very clay spoke of adaptation, resilience, and quiet resistance. What's extraordinary is how these hybrid techniques became a lifeline for cultural survival. In missions across the Americas, indigenous potters were often forced to produce wares for colonial markets, yet hidden in plain sight, they smuggled in their own traditions. A sugar bowl destined for a Spanish hacienda might have a perfectly European shape, but its underside, the part that sat unseen on the table, could bear the fingerprints of the potter's ancestral design. In Mexico, Nahua artisans working in the Talavera tradition developed a secret vocabulary, floral patterns that looked European to the untrained eye, but to the initiated, recalled the sacred flowers of Xochiquetzal, the Aztec goddess of art. These pots are more than artifacts. They're maps of a cultural earthquake, showing how indigenous artisans navigated an unimaginable upheaval. Every glazed surface tells a story of loss and persistence, of techniques preserved and reinvented. When a Hopi potter in Arizona blended local yucca fiber temper with a Spanish glaze to prevent cracking in the dry climate, she wasn't just solving a practical problem. She was writing a new chapter in a story that began thousands of years before the first European ship appeared on the horizon. That's the real power of these objects. They prove that even in the face of conquest, creativity finds a way to endure, adapt, and ultimately to speak across time. Every pot holds a scientific story in its very atoms, a hidden record of the fire that shaped it and the earth it came from. To the untrained eye, two ceramic shards might look similar, but under scientific scrutiny, they can reveal worlds of difference. Take something as simple as firing temperature. Ancient Greek black figure pottery, for example, required a precise three-stage firing process reaching around 900 degrees Celsius, creating its iconic glossy black figures against red clay. Meanwhile, in pre-Columbian Peru, Moche potters achieved their striking blackware by smothering kilns at lower temperatures, around 700 degrees, trapping carbon in the clay. These aren't just technical details, they're cultural signatures, as distinct as handwriting. Modern archaeologists use tools like thermoluminescence dating to read these thermal fingerprints. When clay is fired, it resets the material's internal clock, releasing trapped electrons that slowly accumulate over time. By measuring this stored energy, scientists can pinpoint not just when a pot was made, but even whether it was refired later, a clue that it might have been repurposed by another culture. Imagine a Roman amphora found in India, its original firing date matching the reign of Augustus, but thermoluminescence reveals a secondary heating event centuries later. Suddenly, that pot becomes evidence of a thriving repair trade along ancient maritime routes, where broken vessels were given new life in distant ports. Chemical fingerprinting takes the investigation even deeper. Every region's clay has a unique mix of trace elements: titanium, rubidium, even rare earth metals that act like geological DNA. Neutron activation analysis can detect these minuscule variations, revealing whether a pot was made locally or imported. A stunning example comes from Bronze Age Cyprus, where pots decorated with Egyptian motifs were long assumed to be imports. But chemical analysis showed the clay matched local riverbeds, proving Cypriot artisans were expertly copying foreign styles. Even more remarkable, some of these local pots contained flecks of Nile silt, likely added intentionally to mimic Egyptian materials, an ancient equivalent of branding. Then there's the puzzle of glazes and pigments. The vibrant cobalt blue on a Ming Dynasty vase doesn't just signify artistry, it's a roadmap. By analyzing isotopic ratios in the cobalt, researchers traced some pigments to specific mines in Persia, proving these materials traveled thousands of miles along the Silk Road. In Mesoamerica, the Maya's famous Maya blue pigment, resistant to fading for centuries, was created by mixing indigo with palygorskite clay through a ritual heating process. When Spanish colonial pots suddenly appeared with this same vibrant hue, it wasn't just aesthetic borrowing, it was evidence of Maya artisans continuing their traditions under new rulers, hiding technological mastery in plain sight. Perhaps the most cutting-edge technique is residue analysis, where scientists examine microscopic leftovers trapped in a pot's pores. A seemingly plain jar from ancient Carthage might reveal traces of fish guts and salt, tying it to the garum fish sauce trade. Another from medieval England could bear chemical signatures of beeswax, suggesting it stored honey, or perhaps held candles for Christian rituals. These invisible clues transform generic containers into intimate snapshots of daily life. In one extraordinary case, residue inside a Mycenaean stirrup jar from Greece contained traces of olive oil flavored with oregano and thyme, a recipe matching Linear B tablet records of perfumed oil shipments to Egypt. Science didn't just confirm trade routes, it let us smell the past. What makes these methods so revolutionary is how they uncover the unexpected. X-ray fluorescence scanning of what appeared to be a standard Tang Dynasty bowl revealed something astonishing. Its golden luster wasn't gold at all, but a sophisticated mixture of silver and copper sulfides applied before firing. This poor man's gold technique was thought to be a medieval European innovation, yet here it was in 8th century China, suggesting trans-Eurasian knowledge transfer centuries earlier than believed. Similarly, when Italian archaeologists tested the glossy black bucchero ware of the Etruscans, they found its distinctive sheen came not from glaze, but from polishing the leather-hard clay with smooth stones before firing, a technique shared with contemporary Iberian cultures, hinting at undocumented Mediterranean connections. The real magic happens when these scientific threads weave together. A single storage jar from ancient Antioch might tell multiple stories. Thermoluminescence dates it to the Crusader period. Chemical analysis shows clay from local rivers, yet its shape copies Fatimid Egyptian designs. Residue analysis reveals peppercorns from India, while brush marks under magnification match known Armenian workshop techniques. Suddenly, this isn't just a pot, it's a document of a multicultural city where Armenian craftsmen shaped Syrian clay into Egyptian-style containers for Asian spices, all under Frankish rule. Science strips away assumptions, letting the clay speak for itself, and what it's telling us is that the ancient world was far more interconnected, more inventive, and more surprising than we ever imagined. These aren't just laboratory curiosities. Every time a firing technique or clay composition defies expectations, it forces us to rethink history's grand narratives. When Viking Age pots in Sweden were found to contain clay from the Rhine Valley, It wasn't just proof of trade, it showed Norse societies valued continental ceramics enough to import them despite having superb local potters. Similarly, the discovery that some Roman pots in Britain were actually local imitations made with added crushed brick tells us less about technology and more about identity, Britons signaling Romanness through their cooking where long after the legions left. The science of pottery doesn't just reveal how things were made, it shows us how people saw themselves and how they wanted to be seen by others across time and space. A pot is never just a pot, especially when it becomes a meeting ground for two civilizations, those swirls, animals, and geometric patterns etched into clay. They're more than decoration, they're a coded language, a silent negotiation between worldviews. Consider the Minoan snake goddess figurines found in ancient Syria, their familiar coiled serpents now intertwined with local lunar symbols. To a Minoan, those snakes represented regeneration. To a Syrian, they echoed moon goddess Tiamat's power. The potter who blended these motifs wasn't just making art, they were crafting a bridge between pantheons. Some of the most striking examples come from the edges of empires where symbols collided with purpose. Along the Nile's delta, Nubian potters working under Egyptian rule created vessels that told two stories at once. A water jar might feature the Egyptian god happy blessing the Nile's floods, but look closer, and his blue skin carries the dotted scarification patterns unique to Nubian tribes. This wasn't accidental. It was a quiet assertion of identity, a way to say, we adapt but we don't disappear. Even the colors held meaning. The vibrant ochres favored by Nubian artists were layered beneath Egyptian turquoise glazes, creating a visual metaphor for cultural layers preserved beneath the surface. Political messages often simmered beneath the glaze. When Persian conquerors introduced their elegant drinking vessels to Greek colonies in Ionia, local potters responded with subversive wit. A wine cup might adopt the Persian pear-shaped form, but its painted scenes showed Greek heroes defeating Oriental monsters, a not-so-subtle resistance in clay. The real genius, these pots circulated in Persian-held markets, their messages hidden in plain sight. Meanwhile, in the opposite direction, Persian nobles commissioned Greek artisans to make vessels depicting their royal hunts, but the artists smuggled in Hellenistic realism, rendering the king's face with unflattering individuality rather than stylized perfection. Every stroke of the brush became a power play. Religious syncretism found its purest expression in these hybrid designs. In Roman Britain, Celtic potters created altar vessels for Roman temples, blending the Roman eagle with the Celtic spirals representing the other world. The result, a ritual object that let worshippers feel devotion to Jupiter while honoring their ancestral beliefs. Similarly, in Vijayanagara, India, Muslim potters working for Hindu kings developed a unique motif, lotus flowers unfolding into Arabic calligraphy spelling Allah. These weren't compromises, they were revelations, proof that sacred symbols could share space without losing their essence. The most profound hybrid pots often served as diplomatic gifts, their designs carefully calibrated to speak across cultures. When the Tang dynasty sent ceramics to Abbasid rulers, they chose pieces decorated with phoenixes, a bird the Chinese associated with imperial authority, but which Persians linked to the mythical Simurgh of enlightenment. Both sides could read their own meaning into the gift. Centuries later, Spanish conquistadors received Aztec chocolate vessels painted with quetzal feathers, a symbol of divinity to the Aztecs, but which the Spanish interpreted as exotic decoration. The tragic irony, those same pots sometimes bore glyphs subtly invoking the flower wars, the Aztec ritual battles the Spaniards would soon obliterate. What makes these symbolic fusions so powerful is their ambiguity. A single motif could be read differently depending on who held it. The makara, a sea creature from Hindu-Buddhist art, migrated onto Islamic pottery in Indonesia as a decorative element, but to Hindu merchants trading there, it still carried whispers of its original meaning as a guardian of thresholds. Even materials held layered significance. Tibetan tea bowls made with Nepalese clay but fired with Chinese techniques weren't just practical objects. Their speckled glaze, called Tears of the Moon in Tibet but Star Frost in China, became a poetic meeting point between cosmologies. These pots challenge our modern assumptions about cultural purity. A single 14th century bowl from Al-Andalus might feature Christian liturgical Latin around its rim, Islamic geometric stars on its sides, and a base shaped like a Jewish menorah, a trifecta of faiths in one object. Was this coexistence, appropriation, or something more fluid? The answer lies in the hands that made them, Mozarabic artisans who moved freely between worlds, translating symbols as effortlessly as merchants translated languages. Their legacy reminds us that identity has always been more mosaic than monolith, and sometimes the truest map of human connection is written in glaze and clay. Deep in the ruins of a Bronze Age city in Mesopotamia, archaeologists uncovered a cluster of pottery shards that didn't match anything in the known record. These fragments bore a peculiar metallic sheen, as if the potter had somehow fused powdered copper into the clay before firing a technique unseen before or since. Even stranger, the same distinctive method appeared centuries later, thousands of miles away in the Indus Valley, only to disappear again just as abruptly. This wasn't just a lost art, it was a ghost in the archaeological record, flickering into existence across time and space before vanishing without explanation. Theories abound about why such sophisticated techniques could simply evaporate from history. One compelling clue comes from the copper-sheened shards themselves. Chemical analysis revealed traces of a rare arsenic compound mixed into the clay, a mineral only found in a few remote mountain valleys. This suggests the technique might have been tied to a specific group of artisans who either died out or were displaced by conflict. Imagine a master potter's family, their knowledge passed down through generations, suddenly scattered by invasion or drought. Without apprentices to carry the tradition forward, their unique methods would vanish as suddenly as a snuffed-out flame. Trade routes tell another part of the story. The Indus Valley fragments appeared during a period of thriving maritime exchange with Mesopotamia, then disappeared just as those trade networks collapsed. It's possible the technique relied on imported materials that became impossible to source when ships stopped sailing. Think of it like a recipe requiring an exotic spice. Once the supply chain breaks, the dish can't be recreated. But here's the twist. Some scholars argue the technique didn't disappear at all. They point to faint similarities in later Persian lusterware, raising the tantalizing possibility that the knowledge survived in fragments, passed along in whispers between potters' guilds for centuries before resurfacing in new forms. Changing tastes played a role too. In the ruins of a Hittite palace, archaeologists found storage jars with a distinctive double-layered glaze, an incredibly labor-intensive process that produced dazzling, iridescent effects. Yet within a few generations, the style vanished completely. The likely culprit, a shift in royal fashion. When a new dynasty took power, their preference for simpler, earth-toned pottery might have rendered the technique obsolete overnight. It's a reminder that ancient artisans weren't just craftsmen. They were at the mercy of patrons and politics. A single decree from a king could erase centuries of innovation, leaving behind only cryptic shards for modern scholars to puzzle over. Perhaps the most haunting examples come from the Maya collapse. In the 9th century, certain elite workshops were producing polychrome vessels with a signature mirror black background, achieved through a secret firing process involving smoke and rapid cooling. Then, as cities emptied and dynasties fell, the method disappeared so completely that modern attempts to replicate it have failed. The truth might be heartbreakingly simple. When the last master potter fled a crumbling city, they took the secret with them. What makes these vanished techniques so fascinating isn't just their disappearance, it's what they reveal about the fragility of knowledge. A single generation gap, a disrupted trade route, or a conqueror's indifference could erase innovations that took centuries to perfect. Yet every time archaeologists uncover one of these ghost techniques, it's a reminder that the ancient world was far more inventive than we often assume. Behind every mysterious shard lies a story, not just of loss, but of the brilliant, fleeting moments when human creativity burned especially bright. Consider the hands that shaped history, not kings or conquerors, but the potters who knelt daily at their wheels, their fingers tracing the meeting point between cultures. These artisans were the original diplomats, speaking a language of clay and fire that crossed borders long before treaties ever could. In the bustling workshops of ancient Antioch, a single potter might have thrown vessels in the Greek style 1 hour, then switched to Parthian designs the next, blending techniques as effortlessly as merchants blended languages in the marketplace. Their workshops became melting pots in the truest sense, where a teenager apprenticing under a master from another land could become a living bridge between traditions. One remarkable example comes from 9th century Nishapur, where excavations revealed a kiln site with layers telling a silent saga of adaptation. The earliest strata contained purely Persian wares, bold geometric designs on sturdy clay. Then suddenly Chinese-inspired celadon fragments appear. Their pale green glaze a shocking departure. But here's the revelation: chemical analysis proved these weren't imports. Local potters had reverse engineered the technique after seeing broken shards from traded pieces, experimenting until they replicated the luminous finish using local minerals. Even more telling, these fake celadons soon developed distinct Persian flourishes, arabesque patterns, replacing Chinese florals, creating something entirely new. This wasn't imitation, it was alchemy, transforming borrowed knowledge into cultural innovation. The real unsung heroes were often women, their contributions erased by time yet preserved in the clay itself. In March pottery workshops along Peru's northern coast, forensic analysis of fingerprints shows female artisans dominated production. When Spanish colonial accounts dismissed indigenous pottery as women's craft, they missed the genius at work. These potters had developed a secret code. Vessels used in rituals bore subtle thumbprints pressed into the base, a signature system linking objects to specific lineages of knowledge keepers. Centuries later, when archaeologists found nearly identical water jars in distant valleys, the fingerprint patterns proved the movement of these master craftswomen between communities, spreading techniques through kinship networks rather than conquest. Apprenticeship was the lifeblood of this cross-cultural exchange. A Syrian glassmaker's diary from the 13th century, preserved in the dry air of a Cairo geniza, describes training under a Byzantine master who'd fled Constantinople's fall. The apprentice marvels at learning to mix cobalt in the Frankish manner, while teaching his teacher Arabic glaze formulas in return. Such reciprocal learning left physical traces. Damascus ware from this period shows Greek-style millefeury patterns executed with Islamic luster techniques, a literal fusion of light and color. These mentors and students didn't just share methods, they created visual dialects that let civilizations converse across generations. Some potters became celebrities in their own right, their names echoing through history. The legendary Korean celadon master Kang Hyo of the 12th century wasn't just an artisan, he was a cultural broker. Chinese records describe him as the green ware sage who spoke with clays of many lands, credited with adapting Jian ware tea bowl designs for Korean tastes by making them shallower to suit local drinking customs. His disciples carried these innovations to Japan, where they influenced the birth of Roku ware. Kang understood that adapting a technique wasn't about inferiority or superiority, it was about dialogue. When he inset Chinese-style lotus motifs into Korean cloud patterns, he wasn't copying, he was translating. The most profound legacy of these artisans lies in their willingness to fail. In the ruins of a Mayan workshop at Decode, archaeologists found a treasure trove of mistakes, pots cracked from experimental firing temperatures, pigments that ran, and bizarre hybrid shapes. These weren't discards, they were a laboratory. One particularly telling shard shows a Mayan glyph attempted with an unfamiliar brush, likely by a potter trained in Teotihuacan techniques. The wobbling lines speak volumes about that moment of awkward, determined learning, the human reality behind cultural exchange. Every perfect hybrid pot in museums sits atop a hidden mountain of such experiments, each failure a stepping stone to something new. What's truly humbling is how these artisans thought beyond their lifetimes. The Nguni potters of southern Africa had a tradition. When teaching a new glaze method, the master would deliberately leave one step incomplete, saying, "This is for you to discover." Centuries later, chemical analysis revealed subtle variations in identical-looking pots, evidence of each generation's unique solution to the puzzle. In a world obsessed with ownership and patents, these anonymous masters understood that knowledge grows only when shared, and that the finest creations emerge from hands unafraid to borrow, bend, and reimagine. Their greatest masterpiece wasn't any single pot, but the living tradition they passed forward, one that still shapes how we understand our interconnected past. In the courts of ancient empires where languages clashed and translators struggled, a different kind of diplomacy was unfolding, one shaped by clay and fire. When the Chinese Han Dynasty sent envoys westward along the Silk Road, their most powerful negotiators weren't just scholars or soldiers, they were potters. Packed among silks and spices were exquisite celadon vessels, their jade-like glaze whispering of imperial sophistication. To the nomadic Xiongnu leaders receiving these gifts, the message was clear. Here was a civilization so advanced they could turn earth into something resembling precious stone. These weren't mere presents, they were arguments in ceramic form, designed to awe and persuade without a word being spoken. The practice reached its zenith in the Ottoman courts, where Iznik pottery became a geopolitical chess piece. Sultans would dispatch elaborately tiled drinking sets to European monarchs, each cobalt and emerald motif carefully chosen. A tulip design sent to the Habsburgs wasn't just decorative, it referenced the flower's Central Asian origins, subtly reminding recipients of Ottoman cultural reach. Venetian ambassadors, no strangers to power plays, recognized the gambit. Their dispatches home noted how these ceramics spoke in colors what could not be said in treaties, often prompting counter-gifts of Murano glassware painted with Ottoman-inspired patterns. The resulting exchange resembled a conversation conducted entirely through objects, each iteration adding layers of meaning. Some of history's most delicate diplomatic dances happened through pottery. When the Japanese warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi received Korean envoys during the tense peace after the Imjin War, the negotiations didn't begin with documents or speeches. Instead, Hideyoshi's tea master served matcha in a raku-ware bowl, its rough texture and asymmetry embodying the Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi. The Korean diplomats, recognizing the gesture, responded by praising the bowl's resemblance to their own buncheong pottery. This seemingly casual exchange allowed both sides to acknowledge shared artistic values before addressing territorial disputes. the bowl became neutral territory where difficult conversations could begin. Ceramic diplomacy sometimes carried covert messages. Ming Dynasty emperors gifted porcelain to Southeast Asian rulers with designs tailored to local beliefs, dragons for Vietnamese leaders who revered them, phoenixes for Javanese courts associating the bird with cosmic harmony. But hidden in these designs were subtle reinforcements of Chinese centrality. The dragons always faced left the imperial direction, while phoenixes perched on rocks representing China's 5 sacred mountains. To the untrained eye, these were beautiful artworks. To recipients schooled in symbolism, they were constant reminders of hierarchy wrapped in the velvet glove of generosity. The flip side of this soft power was the deliberate withholding of techniques. For centuries, Chinese potters guarded the secret of true porcelain so closely that European royalty paid fortunes for single pieces. Augustus the Strong of Saxony went so far as to imprison alchemist Johann Friedrich Berger, demanding he replicate the white gold. When Berger finally produced Mason porcelain in 1708, it wasn't just a technical breakthrough, it shattered China's ceramic monopoly, shifting the balance of cultural influence. The very act of mastering the craft became a declaration of independence from Eastern dominance. Perhaps the most poignant examples come from colonial encounters, where pottery served as both olive branch and resistance. When Spanish friars in the Americas established mission workshops, they taught European techniques, but indigenous potters quietly subverted them. A communion chalice might be shaped to European specifications, yet its clay contained ground ancestral pottery, literally mixing old beliefs with new forms. Similarly, in British-controlled India, Lucknow artisans created hybrid tableware, bone china tea sets adorned with miniature Mughal hunting scenes, allowing elite Indian families to host colonial officials while preserving cultural pride. These clay conversations continue today. When contemporary Chinese artists recreate Tang Dynasty ceramics for international exhibitions, or when Native American potters incorporate ancestral designs into modern gallery pieces, they're participating in a tradition as old as civilization itself. One where the humblest of materials carries the weight of history, identity, and the eternal human desire to connect across divide. The next time you see an ancient vase in a museum, look beyond its beauty. What you're really seeing is one half of a conversation that spanned centuries, waiting for someone to listen. The desert winds of ancient Mesopotamia carried more than sand. They shaped the very way potters approached their craft. In regions where wood was scarce, artisans developed kilns that could reach blistering temperatures using dried dung or bundled reeds, materials that burned hotter and faster than timber. Contrast this with the dense forests of Central Europe, where potters built massive brick kilns designed for slow, steady burns over days. When these civilizations collided, their firing techniques didn't just coexist, they transformed. A Babylonian potter trading with Hittite merchants might return home with a revolutionary idea, lining their kiln walls with heat-reflective clay mixed with crushed limestone, a trick learned from mountain dwellers accustomed to conserving warmth in chilly highland nights. Water, or the lack of it, wrote its own chapter in ceramic history. Along the monsoon-drenched coasts of Southeast Asia, potters perfected porous earthenware that breathed in the humidity, preventing stored grains from spoiling. But when Indian Ocean traders introduced these vessels to the arid Middle East, the results were disastrous. The same pots that preserved rice in Goa crumbled into dust under Baghdad's scorching sun. The solution emerged from collaboration. Persian potters taught their coastal counterparts to mix local clays with crushed quartz, creating hybrid ceramics that could withstand both tropical rains and desert heat. These adaptations weren't just practical, they were testaments to how necessity bridges cultural divides. Altitude added another layer of complexity. In the thin air of the Andes, where open fires struggle for oxygen, Quechua potters developed underground kilns that used terraced air channels to control combustion. When Spanish colonists arrived with their Mediterranean-style updraft kilns, the results were comically ineffective, their elaborate designs starved of oxygen at 10,000 feet. Yet within decades, hybrid kilns appeared across the Andes, combining European brick arches with indigenous subterranean designs. The fingerprints on these structures tell a silent story, indigenous masons leaving deliberate imperfections in the brickwork, a traditional practice believed to let spirits move freely, even as they adopted foreign materials. Perhaps the most dramatic climate-driven fusion occurred along the Silk Road's frozen stretches. Chinese potters caravanning north discovered their delicate porcelains shattered in the Kazakh steppes' brutal winters until local nomads showed them how to mix horsehair into the clay, creating a flexible lattice that resisted cracking. In return, the Chinese shared their secret of high-temperature kilns, allowing steppe artisans to fire waterproof vessels for the first time. The resulting snow porcelain became a coveted trade item, its surface etched with patterns resembling both Chinese clouds and nomadic animal motifs. These weren't just functional adaptations, they were frozen conversations between earth and sky, preserved in glaze and grit. Even rainfall patterns left their mark. In Japan's humid summers, potters developed the unique Noburigama climbing kiln, a multi-chambered structure that allowed different firing conditions in each section. When Korean artisans encountered these kilns after invasions in the 16th century, they adapted the design to their own rainy season, adding angled roofs that shed water while trapping heat. The modified kilns produced the iconic puncheong, where its milky glaze flecked with iron spots that seemed to mimic rainfall, a perfect marriage of foreign technology and local climate. Centuries later, when British potter Bernard Leach studied these kilns, he marveled at how they bowed to the weather like trees, their forms sculpted by generations of artisans negotiating with the elements. The ultimate testament to climate's role lies in failure. Archaeologists in Morocco found shattered remnants of Roman pottery workshops where Mediterranean techniques met Saharan realities. Kilns collapsed from overheating in the dry heat, beautiful Italian-style slips flaking off in the relentless sun. Yet nearby, they uncovered successful hybrid pieces, amphorae with thicker walls and muted earth tones, clearly shaped by Berber potters who understood their environment. These silent ruins remind us that when cultures collide, the earth itself gets a vote, and those who listen closest to its whispers create ceramics that endure. In the quiet corners of ancient tombs and the sacred spaces of forgotten temples, pottery tells stories not just of daily life, but of the divine. Across civilizations, clay vessels became conduits for the sacred containers for offerings, vessels for ritual libations, even earthly homes for the departed. But when cultures with different spiritual traditions collided, something extraordinary happened. Their sacred ceramics began to speak in a blended language of belief. Take the Greco-Buddhist art of ancient Gandhara, where archaeologists uncovered funeral urns that defy easy categorization. These vessels combine the Greek tradition of lekithoit, tall, slender oil flasks used to anoint the dead, with Buddhist symbolism. One particularly striking example features the familiar shape of a Greek flask, but its surface is painted with scenes of the Buddha's parinirvana, his final passing from this world. Even the glaze tells a story of fusion. The metallic sheen comes from a Greek technique of adding powdered silver to the clay, while the deep blue background uses lapis lazuli from Afghan mines sacred to local Buddhist communities. This wasn't just a cultural mashup, it was a spiritual dialogue where mourning traditions from opposite ends of the ancient world found common ground in clay. Further west, in Roman Egypt, the cult of Isis adopted and adapted Greek ceremonial wear in surprising ways. Worshippers would leave terracotta votive cups at shrines, many shaped like Greek kylixes but inscribed with hieroglyphs invoking Isis's protection. Chemical analysis reveals something even more fascinating. The clay often contains traces of Nile silt, intentionally mixed in by Egyptian potters working for Greek clients. For the Greeks, these cups held wine for libations. For Egyptians, the Nile clay connected the offering to the life-giving river itself. A single vessel could thus perform dual rituals, pouring wine for Zeus while symbolically honoring Hapi, the Nile god. The Americas offer equally profound examples of sacred syncretism in clay. When Spanish missionaries introduced Christian sacramental vessels to Andean communities, Quechua potters responded with astonishing creativity. Chalices took on the form of Inca ceremonial cups called quiros, their stems decorated with both crosses and Andean stepped motifs, representing the three worlds of Inca cosmology. Some even had hidden compartments in the base, a practical feature for storing small offerings, but also perhaps a nod to ancestral practices of secreting coca leaves in ritual objects. These hybrid vessels didn't just serve new religious purposes, they became bridges between cosmologies, allowing worshippers to honor old gods while outwardly conforming to new ones. Perhaps nowhere is this spiritual blending more poignant than in the Jewish catacombs of Rome, where archaeologists found oil lamps that tell a silent story of cultural survival. On the surface, they resemble standard Roman lamps until you notice the tiny menorah etched discreetly on the base. Made by Jewish artisans living under imperial rule, these lamps could be used openly in Roman households while still carrying secret symbols of identity. The clay itself bears witness to this dual existence. Analysis shows it was sourced from the same quarries as pagan religious objects, proving these craftsmen weren't segregated in ghettos but integrated into mainstream workshops. Their art became a quiet act of resistance, shaping Roman forms to Jewish hands. The most unexpected sacred hybrids often emerged from conflict. After Muslim rulers conquered Visigothic Spain, Mozarabic Christians continued producing pottery with crosses hidden in geometric patterns that resembled Islamic design. One stunning alberlo, a pharmacy jar from 10th century Cordoba, appears at first glance to be typical Islamic ware, covered in arabesques, but tilt it in certain light, and the interlacing lines resolve into crosses, their arms formed by the negative space between vines. This visual trickery wasn't just about survival, it reflected a deeper theological conversation about the nature of the divine. Just as the crosses emerged from the pattern when viewed correctly, so too might spiritual truth reveal itself to the properly attuned eye. These sacred ceramics challenge our modern assumptions about religious boundaries. A single ritual vessel might bear the fingerprints of multiple belief systems, like the Tantric Buddhist bowls found along the Silk Road that incorporate Hindu yantras, Zoroastrian fire symbols, and even Nestorian Christian crosses in their designs. To the artisan who crafted them, these weren't contradictions but layers of sacred power, each tradition adding its voice to a chorus of protection or blessing. When we hold such objects today, we're not just touching clay, we're touching the moment when heaven itself became a meeting ground. The vibrant exchange of pottery techniques between civilizations wasn't always destined to last. Some hybrid methods flourished for generations, while others vanished as suddenly as they appeared, like echoes of a conversation cut short by time. Take the exquisite egg-shell pottery of the ancient Khmer Empire, a delicate fusion of Chinese porcelain techniques and local Khmer designs. These paper-thin vessels, adorned with intricate carvings of Hindu deities, once graced the tables of Anka's elite. yet by the 15th century, the knowledge to create them had evaporated. The culprit, a perfect storm of environmental collapse and political fragmentation. As the Angkorian Empire's sophisticated water management systems failed, droughts forced potters to abandon their workshops near the Tonle Sap Lake, their kilns left to crumble beneath encroaching jungle. Without the stable trade networks that once supplied specialized clays and shared techniques, the art simply couldn't survive. Economic shifts could erase traditions just as decisively. Along the Swahili coast, archaeologists uncovered evidence of a stunning hybrid style. Persian lusterware techniques applied to African terracotta, creating vessels that shimmered with gold accents against rich red clay. These pieces thrived during the height of the Indian Ocean trade, when Kilwa's merchants grew wealthy from gold and ivory. But when Portuguese warships disrupted those trade routes in the 16th century, the delicate supply chain for Persian cobalt and specialized glazes snapped. Local potters, though skilled, couldn't replicate the effect with available materials. Within decades, the technique faded into memory, leaving behind only scattered shards that hint at what was lost. Sometimes the disappearance was deliberate. After the Mongol conquests of the 13th century, the brilliant turquoise glazed pottery of Nishapur, a blend of Central Asian and Persian styles, abruptly ceased production. Historical records suggest why Mongol rulers seeking to consolidate power forcibly relocated entire communities of artisans to their new capital at Karakoram. Uprooted from their native clays and kilns, these potters found their hybrid techniques impossible to sustain on the steppe. The vibrant turquoise glaze, dependent on specific copper deposits near Nishapur, became chemically unstable when artisans tried to improvise with local materials. What began as cultural exchange ended in cultural erasure, as political ambition overwrote centuries of accumulated knowledge. Technological progress could also render hybrid styles obsolete. In 18th century Europe, the rise of industrial porcelain factories in Meissen and Sevres spelled doom for countless local pottery traditions that had blended indigenous methods with imported designs. A poignant example comes from the English Midlands, where Staffordshire potters had developed a unique slipware technique combining Dutch tin glazing with Anglo-Saxon clay treatments. These charming pieces, often decorated with rustic floral motifs, couldn't compete with the flood of cheap, uniform porcelain from mechanized workshops. By the early 19th century, the last practitioners had either adapted to factory work or abandoned the craft entirely. The kilns that once produced these hybrid wares were repurposed for brick-making literal foundations laid over cultural memory. Perhaps the most heartbreaking disappearances occurred when hybrid pottery became collateral damage in cultural suppression. In colonial Mexico, the vibrant Majolica tradition, a fusion of Spanish tin glazing and indigenous painted symbolism, thrived for generations in Puebla's workshops. But during the 19th century push for European-style modernization, these pieces were dismissed as folk art by elites seeking to emulate French fashions. Archival letters from the period reveal master potters begging apprentices to continue the old ways, even as government schools taught only industrial ceramic methods. By the 1920s, the last artisans who understood the original hybrid techniques had died, taking with them the precise recipes for the vibrant orange glaze that had once made Puebla pottery famous across 2 continents. Yet, even in extinction, these lost techniques leave whispers for us to decipher. Neutron activation analysis of clay from failed hybrid pieces, those cracked experiments at the edges of archaeological sites, can reveal the moment when knowledge fractured. A shard from post-conquest Peru might show the exact ratio where Andean clay was incorrectly mixed with Spanish lead glaze, causing catastrophic firing failures. These mistakes are like frozen instants, capturing the precise technological crossroads where one culture's understanding of another broke down. They remind us that cultural dialogue is fragile, requiring not just contact but continuous care to sustain. The pots that didn't survive tell us as much about human connection as those that did, perhaps even more. In a small studio in New Mexico, artist Maria Martinez's great-granddaughter kneads clay using the same coil-building techniques perfected by her ancestors centuries ago, but with a surprising twist. The black-on-black pottery she creates, famous since the 1920s, now incorporates motifs inspired by ancient Greek geometric patterns, a nod to her time studying classical archaeology in Athens. This isn't just revival, it's reinvention. Across the globe, a quiet revolution is unfolding as contemporary potters resurrect forgotten hybrid methods, proving that the dialogue between civilizations never truly ends, it merely pauses, waiting for new hands to pick up the thread. One of the most striking examples comes from Japan, where ceramist Hiroshi Suzuki has dedicated his career to reconstructing the elusive, golden celadon of the Song dynasty, a technique lost when Mongol invasions disrupted Chinese kilns in the 13th century. After decades of experimentation, Suzuki achieved a breakthrough by combining traditional Japanese wood ash glazes with microscopic gold particles suspended in the clay, a method inspired by medieval Persian lusterware. The result, a glaze that shimmers like moonlight on water, a literal fusion of East and West. His work doesn't just mimic the past, it asks what might have been if those cultural exchanges had continued uninterrupted. Meanwhile, in Istanbul, the atelier of Fatma Öztürk has become a laboratory for Ottoman Chinese synthesis, using 16th century recipes rediscovered in Topkapi Palace archives. Her team fires porcelain with a signature crimson glaze originally developed for Ming court vases, but decorates them with Ottoman tulip motifs in cobalt. The process requires staggering precision. The Chinese glaze matures at 1,200 degrees Celsius, while the cobalt pigments burn away above 950. By constructing a kiln with separate temperature zones, a technique borrowed from ancient Korean climbing kilns, Öztürk's team achieves what was once deemed impossible. Each piece that emerges is a testament to patience and cross-cultural curiosity. The revival movement isn't confined to studios. In Oaxaca, Mexico, a cooperative of Zapotec women has resurrected a pre-Columbian technique for creating iridescent pottery without glazes, a secret once thought lost to Spanish colonial suppression. By polishing unfired clay with quartz stones before a unique reduction firing, they produce surfaces that gleam like mercury. But the real innovation lies in their collaborations. Partnering with Moroccan artisans, they've adapted Saharan slip trailing methods to create intricate designs that honor both indigenous Mexican and North African heritage. Their work sells in Paris galleries, yet remains rooted in village traditions, proof that ancient hybrid techniques can thrive in a globalized world. Perhaps no modern project better embodies this spirit than the Silk Road Clay Collective, a network of artisans from Iran to Japan experimenting with shared materials. Last year, they recreated the legendary blue and white porcelain using Afghan lapis lazuli ground by hand in Herat and mixed with Chinese kaolin clay, the first such collaboration since the Timurid Empire. The vessels, fired in a reconstructed Samarkand kiln, bear motifs that morph seamlessly from Persian arabesques to Chinese cloud scrolls. What makes this endeavor extraordinary isn't just the technical achievement, but the intentional erasure of borders. As Iranian member Parisa Nazari notes, when the glaze melts, it doesn't ask about nationality. These revivals challenge our assumptions about cultural ownership. When British potter Julian Stair produces work inspired by Tang Dynasty Sankai 3-color ware using Cornish clay and local minerals, is it appropriation or homage? Stair argues it's neither, it's conversation. His glazes, though chemically identical to 8th century Chinese recipes, react unpredictably with English clay, creating wholly new effects. Every time we revive an ancient technique, he reflects, we're not copying history, we're adding another layer to it. This philosophy echoes in studios worldwide, where artisans treat lost methods not as static artifacts, but as living languages waiting for new sentences. Technology plays an unexpected role in these rediscoveries. In Seoul, the Digital Archaeology of Ceramics project uses CT scanning to analyze the microstructure of Goryeo Dynasty celadon, revealing precise pore distributions that gave the glaze its legendary depth. Modern potters feed this data into 3D printers to recreate the clay bodies with scientific accuracy, yet still hand-paint designs using brushes made from the traditional horsetail hair. The marriage of pixel and pigment produces vessels that would baffle a 12th century artisan, yet feel hauntingly familiar. What unites these diverse efforts is a recognition that hybrid techniques aren't historical accidents, they're humanity's default setting. When Egyptian ceramicist Fatma Abu Ilenian blends pharaonic faience with Nubian burnishing methods in her Cairo workshop, she's not reviving the past so much as proving its relevance. The ancients weren't purists, she laughs, smoothing a vessel that will later be inscribed with hieroglyphs and contemporary Arabic poetry. They took what worked just like we do. Her words hang in the air like kiln smoke, a reminder that the most enduring traditions are those flexible enough to embrace change. The discovery of a single hybrid pot can ignite fierce debates that last decades in archaeological circles. Take the famous Nubian-Egyptian storage jars found near Aswan. To some scholars, these vessels represent clear evidence of cultural exchange, their rounded bases reflecting Nubian water carrying traditions, while the painted lotus motifs scream Egyptian artistry. But other researchers argue vehemently that these are Egyptian imitations of Nubian styles, created by occupying forces to appeal to conquered populations. The disagreement isn't just academic, it shapes how we understand power dynamics along the Nile 3,000 years ago. At the heart of these debates lies a fundamental question: when does borrowing become appropriation? A team excavating in ancient Antioch recently uncovered plates bearing both Roman feasting scenes and Parthian hunting imagery. The lead archaeologist insists this proves peaceful cultural blending, pointing to chemical analysis showing local artisans produced them. Yet her colleague counters that the Roman elements dominate the composition, suggesting imposed assimilation rather than mutual exchange. Their heated conference room arguments mirror larger tensions in the field. How do we distinguish between influence and erasure when only the clay survives? The authenticity debate takes even stranger turns with certain prized museum pieces. That exquisite, a Greco-Buddhist bowl in the British Museum, long celebrated as a pinnacle of cultural fusion. Some now argue it might be a 19th century fake, crafted by colonial-era artisans to feed European fascination with the exotic East. Advanced spectroscopy reveals troubling anomalies in the glaze composition, while the Buddha's facial features suspiciously resemble Victorian artistic conventions. If proven fraudulent, the implications ripple far beyond one object. It forces us to question how many other hybrid artifacts were manufactured to fit romanticized historical narratives. Purists in the field raise another provocative point. Could some supposed cultural blending simply reflect our modern biases? When archaeologists first uncovered Minoan-style fresco fragments in the Egyptian delta, they immediately envisioned Cretan artists working abroad. But recent pigment analysis suggests Egyptian hands using imported techniques, not migrants, but locals selectively adopting foreign methods. This distinction matters profoundly. As one critic notes, we're quick to assume ancient people thought like 21st century globalists when their worldviews were likely far more localized. The pots might mix, but did the potters' identities, perhaps the most contentious discussions, center on power imbalances? That stunning Romano-Celtic vase from Britain, with its Latin inscriptions and native spiral designs, was long hailed as a model of harmonious coexistence. But younger scholars now interrogate who really benefited from this fusion. The clay sourcing tells a darker story. Analysis shows the workshops producing these hybrid wares were strategically located near Roman military bases, with distribution favoring colonial settlements. However beautiful the results, the exchange may have been less voluntary than we'd like to believe. These debates aren't just academic squabbles. They shape how museums display artifacts, how history gets taught, even how modern cultures claim ancestral connections. When a Korean delegation recently demanded the return of Joseon Ming ceramics from a Japanese collection, their argument hinged on whether these were diplomatic gifts or wartime plunder. The glazes contained answers. Trace elements matched clay from Korean royal workshops, but the firing techniques showed clear Japanese Edo period influences. In such cases, the pottery becomes more than evidence, it's active participant in contemporary cultural diplomacy. What makes these discussions so vital is their refusal to let ancient pottery become static museum pieces. Every reinterpretation, every technological breakthrough in analysis breathes new life into old clay. That a Greek-style vase found in Crimea might tell one story today, but tomorrow's scanning technology could reveal underdrawings that completely rewrite its origins. The debates remind us that history isn't set in stone, or in this case, baked in clay. It's an ongoing conversation where each generation gets to ask new questions of the past, and sometimes the pots talk back in surprising ways. Imagine holding a shattered ancient vase in your hand, centuries of history reduced to fragments. Now picture a computer screen where those pieces snap back together like a puzzle, their original colors restored with impossible clarity. This isn't science fiction, it's the cutting edge of archaeology. Advanced imaging technologies are peeling back layers of time, revealing secrets in ceramic glazes that the naked eye could never detect. Hyperspectral imaging, for instance, captures light reflected at hundreds of wavelengths, exposing faded pigments and hidden underdrawings. A seemingly plain Greek amphora might suddenly reveal ghostly traces of a merchant's inventory list scrawled in ink that vanished millennia ago. Or consider X-ray fluorescence scanners, which beam harmless rays at pottery to identify exact chemical compositions. What looks like a generic storage jar to the untrained eye might carry the mineral fingerprint of clay from a single riverbank in Anatolia, proof of trade routes we never knew existed. But the real game changer is 3D modeling. Researchers at the University of Cambridge recently demonstrated how photogrammetry, stitching together hundreds of digital photos, can recreate entire vessels from shards. Their software doesn't just guess at missing pieces, it analyzes fracture patterns and clay textures to predict original shapes with startling accuracy. One project reconstructed a Minoan ritual vessel crushed during the Thera eruption, revealing a spouted design so complex it challenged assumptions about Bronze Age craftsmanship. Even more groundbreaking is the way these models simulate firing conditions. By inputting data from kiln sites, clay density, mineral content, estimated temperatures, scientists can virtually refire ancient pots, watching how glazes flow and colors shift under different conditions. It's like having a time machine for ceramic chemistry, letting us test theories about lost techniques without risking precious artifacts. The implications for cultural exchange studies are profound. At the Metropolitan Museum of Art, conservators used reflectance transformation imaging RTI to study a Persian-style bowl from ancient Egypt. Under raking light simulations, subtle tool marks emerged, not the sweeping strokes of a trained Persian artisan, but the hesitant lines of an Egyptian copyist. This single detail rewrote the object's biography, not an import, but evidence of local artisans experimenting with foreign styles. Similarly, algorithms analyzing brushstroke patterns in Mayan codex-style ceramics have identified individual painters working across different city-states, mapping artistic networks that spanned hundreds of miles. Digital archaeology also breathes life into broken artifacts. The Pottery Atlas project at UCLA has scanned thousands of ceramic fragments from Mediterranean shipwrecks, using AI to match decorative motifs and clay compositions. Their system recently identified two shards, one found off Cyprus, the other near Sicily, as belonging to the same Phoenician storage jar, proving these traders made direct voyages across open sea rather than coast-hopping as previously assumed. Meanwhile, virtual reality reconstructions let researchers walk through ancient kiln sites, observing how the placement of fuel vents or stacking patterns might have influenced firing outcomes. At Pompeii, such simulations revealed that Roman potters deliberately built their workshops near bathhouse furnaces, repurposing waste heat in an early example of industrial symbiosis. The most poetic applications emerge when technology bridges past and present. In Jordan, refugee women from Syria are being trained to digitize ceramic collections at the Petra Museum. As they scan Nabatean pottery with structured light scanners, they're rediscovering decorative techniques from their own ancestral homelands, spirals and zigzags that echo patterns their grandmothers once painted. The project's director calls it heritage in dialogue, where ancient artistry sparks new skills and healing. Similarly, indigenous communities in Australia are using 3D prints of pre-contact pottery to revive forgotten designs, blending archaeological data with oral traditions. A Wiradjuri artist in New South Wales recently recreated a water carrier last made before European colonization. Its curves guided by laser-scanned fragments, but its spirit informed by elders' stories. Yet for all its promise, this digital renaissance raises provocative questions. When algorithms suggest reconstructions of missing vase paintings based on machine learning patterns, are we restoring history or inventing it? Scholars still debate the ethics of virtually repainting eroded designs, beautiful as the results may be. They risk overwriting the authentic wear of time. And as databases fill with thousands of scanned artifacts, who controls access to this digitized cultural heritage? A heated controversy erupted when a European museum released 3D files of West African ceremonial vessels online, only to learn commercial potters were mass-producing replicas without community consultation. The clay may be ancient, but the conversations around it have never been more current. What's undeniable is how these tools are transforming our relationship with the past. That humble cooking pot in a museum case, it's no longer just an object, it's a data point in a global network of cultural connections. Its story unfolding through pixels and algorithms as much as through shards and glazes. As we peer deeper into the atomic structure of ancient ceramics or simulate forgotten kiln atmospheres, we're not just studying history, we're learning to listen to it, one reconstructed brushstroke at a time. A Ming Dynasty vase displayed in a London museum, its cobalt blue patterns swirling with scenes of Chinese pastoral life, seems worlds away from the kilns of Jingdezhen where it was born. This dislocation isn't unique. Countless hybrid pots, those silent witnesses to cultural exchange, now reside far from the lands that shaped them. The ethical questions swirling around these artifacts cut deeper than clay. When a single pot bears the fingerprints of multiple civilizations, who truly holds the right to preserve its story? The debate over repatriation isn't just about returning objects. It's about restoring context to these fragments of shared human ingenuity. Take the case of the Benin bronzes, technically brass, but their creation involved ceramic casting techniques borrowed from Portuguese traders in the 16th century. These stunning pieces, looted during Britain's punitive expedition in 1897, sat in European museums for over a century while Nigerian artisans struggled to reconstruct lost wax methods from memory. The hybrid nature of these works makes the ethics especially complex. Their materials came from European trade, their motifs from Edo traditions. When Germany began returning bronzes in 2022, it wasn't just giving back art. It was reconnecting a living artistic lineage broken by colonial violence. Museums often argue they're preserving global heritage, pointing to climate-controlled vitrines and scholarly access. But consider the Nazca Huari pottery shards in a New York collection, their vibrant parrot designs blending coastal and highland Peruvian styles. In Lima, researchers lack access to study these fragments, which could reveal crucial details about pre-Inca trade routes. The irony, these pots were cultural bridges in their time, yet modern borders and ownership laws now keep them from completing their historical role as connectors. Some institutions are pioneering third ways. The British Museum's Circulating Artifacts program loans hybrid ceramics back to source communities for temporary exhibitions and workshops. A Greco-Bactrian wine cup recently spent 6 months in Afghanistan, where local potters used its layered designs to revive forgotten glaze techniques. Such programs acknowledge a painful truth. While outright repatriation may not always be feasible, keeping artifacts frozen in museum cases risks turning living history into sterile display. Technology is opening unexpected paths forward. When the Metropolitan Museum of Art partnered with Iraqi archaeologists to 3D scan looted Sumerian vessels, they created digital twins, high-resolution models accessible to researchers worldwide. One hybrid jar combining Sumerian form with Akkadian inscriptions became the centerpiece of a Baghdad University's virtual reality exhibit, allowing students to hold the artifact while it physically remains in New York. It's a compromise fraught with contradictions. The digital replica spreads knowledge, yet the original's absence still echoes with colonial history. The most hopeful developments come from collaborative curation. In Australia, the Ungarangeri people worked with Adelaide Museum to reinterpret mission ware, a pottery made by Indigenous women under colonial supervision. These hybrid pieces, once labeled as derivative crafts, now bear labels explaining their hidden resistance, subtle coil marks preserving traditional techniques beneath European-imposed shapes. By recentering Indigenous voices in the narrative, the exhibition transforms what was once seen as cultural surrender into evidence of resilience. At its heart, the debate over these artifacts asks how we value connection versus custody. A single Phoenician Greek amphora might physically belong in a Beirut museum, but its story spans the Mediterranean. Perhaps the solution lies in rethinking ownership altogether, not as possession but as stewardship. When a museum in Mexico City returned a Mixtec Aztec Codex-style vase to its home village, they kept the artifact but transferred interpretive authority to local elders. Now, the accompanying plaque doesn't just describe the pot's age and style. It recounts the oral history of the rain ceremony it once served, told by descendants of the original potters. These conversations are reshaping archaeology itself. Young researchers increasingly prioritize community archaeology, where digs involving hybrid artifacts include local stakeholders from day one. In Cyprus, where Lusignan-era pottery blends French and Byzantine techniques, a current excavation team includes Greek and Turkish Cypriot students jointly analyzing finds. Their discovery of a kiln site producing both Islamic and Christian motifs didn't just rewrite medieval trade maps, it became a tangible reminder that shared heritage can still bridge modern divides. The ethical reckoning extends beyond museums to private collectors and auction houses, that stunning Khmer Chinese bowl fetching millions at Sotheby's. Its journey from Angkor Wat to a billionaire's cabinet likely involved layers of legal and moral gray areas. Some dealers now advocate for provenance partnerships, where sales of hybrid artifacts fund preservation projects in their countries of origin. It's an imperfect system, but one that acknowledges no single culture holds a monopoly on these object stories. Perhaps the purest test case is underwater heritage. When a shipwreck off Indonesia yielded 9th century Arab-Persian storage jars with Javanese repairs, 5 nations claimed cultural ties. The solution: a traveling exhibition where the jars spend time in each country, accompanied by scholars from all 5 regions. The pot's original purpose, to carry goods across seas, thus becomes their modern role, carrying dialogue across borders. These artifacts survived wars, migrations, and the slow erosion of time. How we choose to honor them now, whether behind glass, in repatriated collections, or through shared digital spaces, will determine if they remain static relics or continue their ancient work as ambassadors between worlds. The fire that fused their clays centuries ago still burns in the questions they force us to ask about justice, memory, and who gets to write the next chapter of their stories. In a quiet field in rural England, a retired teacher named Margaret picks up a muddy shard of pottery, brushing away centuries of soil. What she holds isn't just a broken piece of clay, it's a puzzle fragment waiting to reveal its story. This scene repeats daily across the globe, as ordinary people become detectives of the past through citizen archaeology projects. These initiatives are revolutionizing how we study hybrid pottery, turning smartphone-wielding volunteers into vital partners in unraveling ancient cultural connections. Take the Pottery Puzzle project run by the University of Exeter, where thousands of volunteers sort through digital images of ceramic fragments from Roman Britain. Last year, a nurse in Scotland spotted something unusual: a shard with distinctively British curvilinear patterns on one side, but a Roman gladius sword motif on the reverse. Further excavation at the site revealed an entire workshop producing these dual identity pots, evidence of local artisans negotiating life under occupation. Without that keen amateur eye, this critical insight into cultural adaptation might have remained buried. The magic happens through collaboration. In Turkey's Gaziantep region, villagers working alongside archaeologists uncovered a kiln site producing astonishing hybrid ware, Ottoman-style tiles with Armenian inscriptions hidden beneath the glaze. The local participants recognized patterns matching their grandparents' heirlooms, leading researchers to trace a nearly erased artisan community. Projects like these don't just add labor, they bring living memory to the excavation process, bridging gaps that pure academic study can't. Technology amplifies these efforts. The Global Pottery app lets anyone upload photos of unusual ceramics from flea markets or attics. Machine learning compares them to known hybrid types, while human experts verify finds. Recently, a schoolteacher in Argentina submitted images of what seemed like colonial Spanish ware. The app flagged its unusual clay composition, and further analysis revealed Quechua potters had crafted it using traditional pigments mixed with European lead glazes, a previously undocumented resistance technique. Some of the most exciting discoveries come from kitchen table archaeology. The Adopt a Sherd program mails pottery fragments to participants' homes with magnifying glasses and instructions. A retired engineer in Oregon, examining his assigned piece under a desk lamp, noticed microscopic reed impressions suggesting the clay had been molded on a mat, a technique common in ancient Mesopotamia but rare in the accompanying Minoan-style decoration. This tiny detail prompted a re-evaluation of trade routes across the Bronze Age Mediterranean. Educational initiatives are nurturing the next generation of pottery detectives. In Japanese elementary schools, children analyze 3D printed replicas of Jomon Yayoi hybrid vessels, measuring thickness and patterns to theorize about cultural exchange. Their observations sometimes surprise professionals, like when a group of 10-year-olds pointed out that certain cord mark designs appeared more frequently on pots found near rivers, suggesting these might have been trade canoes' cargo. The impact extends beyond academia. In South Africa's Eastern Cape, elders work with archaeologists to identify hybrid pottery techniques that survived colonial suppression. Their knowledge helped reconstruct Nguni firing methods that blend indigenous practices with Dutch kiln designs, a living testament to cultural resilience. These collaborations don't just illuminate the past, they empower communities to reclaim fragmented histories. What makes citizen archaeology so powerful is its democratization of discovery. When a postal worker in Portugal recognized familiar azulejo tile patterns on a supposedly pure Moorish vase in Lisbon's museum, it triggered a museum-wide reclassification. That vase now bears a new label, Cultural Fusion Object. Every time an amateur's observation reshapes our understanding, it proves history isn't locked away in textbooks or elite institutions. It's in the soil beneath our feet, waiting for anyone curious enough to look. The true value of these projects lies in their messy, collective brilliance. Unlike controlled excavations with predetermined hypotheses, public participation brings unpredictable perspectives. A grandmother in New Mexico might spot a ceramic quirk that reminds her of ancestral pottery techniques, while a gamer in Seoul could notice a pattern repetition invisible to scholars steeped in linear analysis. Together, they're rewriting the story of human connection, one shared fragment at a time. Beneath the waves off the coast of Sicily, marine archaeologists recently uncovered a shipwreck laden with cargo that defies categorization: amphorae shaped in classic Roman fashion, but glazed with a vibrant turquoise pigment previously only seen in Persian ceramics. This sunken treasure hints at an entire chapter of cultural exchange we're only beginning to decipher. As technology advances, the next decade of pottery studies promises revelations that could rewrite our understanding of ancient globalization. Imagine deep-sea drones equipped with hyperspectral scanners mapping forgotten trade routes through scattered ceramic debris, or AI algorithms cross-referencing glaze compositions across continents to reveal undocumented artisan networks. One frontier lies in the ocean's uncharted depths, where an estimated 3 million shipwrecks remain undiscovered. Each could be a time capsule of hybrid techniques like the so-called Silk Road of the Sea, connecting China to East Africa, where preliminary sonar surveys suggest vessels carried not just finished wares but potters themselves. Divers in Zanzibar have already recovered kiln furniture alongside Chinese celadon fragments, evidence that artisans may have traveled with traders to demonstrate techniques abroad. Future excavations might uncover workshops established by these cultural ambassadors, their kilns fusing local materials with foreign methods in ways we've never documented. Space-age tools are revolutionizing land-based discoveries too. Portable X-ray diffraction devices now allow archaeologists to analyze clay composition on-site, identifying mineral signatures that pinpoint a pot's origin within miles. In Mongolia, this technology recently revealed that Chinese-style pottery found in Genghis Khan-era sites was actually locally made using imported kaolin clay, proof of material trade even when finished goods weren't exchanged. Upcoming advancements in nanotechnology could take this further, with sensors detecting trace elements like pollen or spices embedded in ceramic pores, reconstructing not just how pots were made but what they carried across cultures. The most tantalizing possibilities emerge from experimental archaeology. Teams in Jordan are reconstructing Nabatean kilns based on 3D scans of ancient desert sites, testing how varying wind patterns affected the vibrant glazes that adorned Petra's pottery. Early trials show that minor adjustments to airflow could produce both Islamic luster and Roman red slip, where in the same firing, suggesting some hybrid styles may have been intentional adaptations to environmental constraints rather than stylistic choices. Similarly, researchers in Japan are replicating Jarman firing techniques using augmented reality to simulate how prehistoric potters might have manipulated open flames to achieve their distinctive flame rim vessels. Artificial intelligence opens another dimension. Machine learning models trained on thousands of ceramic images can now detect subtle pattern connections invisible to the human eye. A project at Oxford recently identified nearly identical brushstroke techniques in Celtic pottery from Britain and Anatolia, separated by 2,000 miles and 5 centuries, hinting at a lost intermediary culture that transmitted artistic knowledge. Future systems might decode entire visual languages of hybrid pottery, revealing how symbols migrated and mutated across civilizations like ceramic memes. Yet some mysteries may resist even the most advanced tools. In the high Andes, Quechua potters still produce blackware using techniques they say were taught by mountain spirits, methods that eerily resemble descriptions in Spanish colonial accounts of Inca rituals. Modern science can explain the chemistry behind the smudging process that creates the glossy black finish. But the oral traditions preserving these methods for 500 years without written records remain a puzzle no algorithm can fully decipher. Similarly, West African pit firing techniques that produce metallic luster without glazes continue to baffle materials scientists, their secrets guarded by guilds that trace their lineages to medieval Mali. The greatest undiscovered hybrid might not lie in the past at all, but in the creative alchemy happening right now. In a Berlin studio, a Syrian refugee potter collaborates with a German ceramicist, combining Aleppo's ancient cobalt recipes with Bauhaus minimalist forms. Their experiments, documented in real time through social media, mirror the same cross-cultural dialogues that shaped ancient masterpieces. Perhaps the future of pottery studies won't just be about unearthing old fusions, but recognizing that the kilns of today are already crafting tomorrow's archaeological mysteries. Every time a modern artist blends traditions, they're adding another layer to a story that began when the first potter looked at a neighbor's work and thought, "What if I tried that?" The next paradigm-shifting discovery might not come from a dig site, but from a studio where two cultures meet again in clay, continuing a conversation as old as civilization itself. Walking through a museum's ceramics gallery, most visitors see rows of perfectly preserved vases and bowls, but look closer, and some will whisper secrets of cultural collision. The first clue often lies in the glaze. A jar might shimmer with the iconic cobalt blue of Ming porcelain, yet its thick, ribbed handles echo Persian metalwork traditions. That's no accident. It's a deliberate fusion where an artisan borrowed a foreign technique to solve a local problem. Persian potters struggled with delicate porcelain, so they reinforced their versions with structural elements from their robust metal vessels. The result, a hybrid that tells two stories at once. Don't just focus on the decoration, examine the base. Many museums display pottery at eye level, but crouch down and you might spot the real giveaway. A Greek amphora with a rounded bottom meant for a stand might have unusual scrape marks along its curve, suggesting it was later used by people who preferred to set pots directly on the ground, like the Etruscans. Even more revealing are kiln scars, those rough, unglazed patches where pots touch during firing. If you find a piece with both Greek stacking marks and Egyptian-style kiln bricks embedded in its surface, you're likely looking at a workshop where techniques crossed borders. The weight of a piece can betray its hybrid origins too. Lift a celadon bowl if the museum allows, and feel its heft. Authentic Korean Goryeo celadon feels like holding a slice of jade, cool and dense, while Chinese versions are often lighter. But if you encounter one with the thin walls of Chinese craftsmanship, yet the olive green tint of Korean glaze, you found a diplomatic gift or the work of a captured artisan. Museums rarely label these nuances, but your hands can detect what placards omit. Listen to the whispers of the clay itself. In the dim light of a display case, tilt your head to catch the play of shadows across the surface. A vessel might appear uniformly red at first glance, but angled light could reveal faint brushstrokes where a potter layered Roman slip over local clay, the pigments reacting differently over centuries. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's Andalusian collection hides dozens of these ghosts' Islamic geometric patterns peeking through later Christian overpainting, their metallic glazes dulled but not erased by time. Seek out the misfits pieces that seem stylistically out of place. That squat, unglazed pot tucked between delicate Tang Dynasty figurines. Its pitted surface and rope impressions mark it as Jomon pottery from prehistoric Japan, likely displayed alongside Chinese works because some long-ago collector recognized the shared chord marking technique. Curators often group such objects unconsciously, preserving connections their labels don't explain. The British Museum's Early Europe Gallery holds a startling example. A Bulgarian vase painted with motifs identical to those on contemporaneous Anatolian pots, evidence of a Black Sea artistic network that predates written history. When descriptions mention imported or influenced by, dig deeper. A placard might credit a piece to Roman Gaul, but the small print could reveal it was found in Germany with Celtic repairs, the ancient equivalent of a patch job using whatever clay was handy. These Frankenstein vessels with mismatched handles or awkwardly sealed cracks often reveal more about cultural exchange than pristine masterpieces. The Louvre's Etruscan wing displays a wine jug with a replacement spout shaped like a Greek satyr's head, the join lines still visible after 2 millennia. Finally, embrace the power of the fragment. While whole pots draw crowds, broken shards in archaeology drawers often hold the juiciest clues. A slice of rim might show where a Native American potter switched from traditional mineral paints to European, introduced lead glazes halfway through a design. The Ashmolean Museum in Oxford lets visitors handle such fragments in their study rooms where fingertips can detect the moment an artisan's tool hesitated between a familiar spiral and an unfamiliar fleur-de-lis. The thrill of spotting these hybrids isn't just in the discovery, it's in the realization that every museum's ceramics collection is a living conversation. That Persian plate might have been fired in Greece by an Egyptian slave, its design dictated by a Macedonian trader. The labels give us categories, but the pots themselves tell messier, richer stories if we learn how to listen. Ever wondered what happens when you combine a traditional pit firing with a modern electric kiln? The answer lies in your own backyard or even your kitchen. You don't need an ancient workshop to explore the magic of blended firing techniques. Start with something simple, a small pinch pot made from air-dry clay. Roll it between your palms, smoothing the surface until it feels like cool, damp stone. Now, here's where history meets experimentation. Ancient potters used whatever materials were at hand, dung, straw, seaweed, to create unique effects. For your first test, try wrapping your dried pot in aluminum foil with a handful of organic materials, coffee grounds for rich brown streaks, crushed eggshells for crackled textures, or even a few strands of copper wire for unexpected flashes of green. Seal the foil packet tightly and place it in a charcoal grill or fire pit. The key is uneven heating, just like our ancestors did. Let the flames lick the packet for about 30 minutes, then carefully retrieve it with tongs. As the foil cools, peel it back to reveal your pot's transformation. The organic materials will have left their mark, creating patterns that echo centuries-old techniques. But why stop there? For the second stage, borrow from the precision of modern kilns. Once your piece is fully dry, give it a quick bake in a standard kitchen oven at a low temperature, around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. This dual firing method mimics the way some medieval potters would pit fire for color before finishing in a kiln for durability. Now, let's take it further. Mix clays like the ancients did. Grab a bag of white earthenware and blend it with a pinch of red terracotta. Knead them together just enough to create swirling marbled effects, then shape a small bowl. For the glaze, raid your pantry. A paste of baking soda and water brushed onto the surface will create a bubbled, cratered texture when fired, while honey drizzled along the rim caramelizes into glossy amber streaks. Fire this piece in a backyard bonfire, nestled among hardwood embers for an hour. The soda ash reacts with the clay to produce a primitive glaze, while the honey's sugars carbonize into shimmering metallic accents. The real fun begins when you document your experiments like an archaeologist of the future. Label each pot with notes on materials, firing times, and temperatures. A month later, bury a few in your garden or a pot of soil, then dig them up to see how they weather. You're not just making art, you're creating future artifacts, testing how different clays and firing methods hold up over time. Who knows, centuries from now, someone might uncover your backyard creations and puzzle over the strange, beautiful fusion of 21st century improvisation and ancient inspiration. Safety first, of course. Always work in a well-ventilated area, use heat-resistant gloves, and keep water nearby. But don't let caution stifle creativity. The most groundbreaking ceramic innovations came from trial and error, from potters daring to ask, what if? Your humble experiments connect you to that unbroken chain of curiosity. And if your first attempts crack or crumble, take heart. Even the finest Ming porcelain started as a lump of clay in someone's uncertain hands. The true magic isn't in perfection, it's in the fingerprints you leave behind, the tangible proof that history isn't just something we study. It's something we can shape, fire, and hold. The workshop smells of damp clay and wood smoke as master potter Elena Vasquez rolls a coil between her palms, her fingers moving with the same rhythm artisans have used for millennia. But what emerges on her wheel is anything but traditional, a vessel that begins as a classic Greek amphora before twisting into a shape reminiscent of pre-Columbian stirrup spouts. Every pot I make is a conversation, she explains, brushing slip onto the surface with a horsehair brush from her grandmother's toolkit. The Minoans taught me how to build thin walls, the Pueblo artist showed me how to polish without glaze, and the Japanese gave me the courage to leave cracks unfilled. Her shelves display this philosophy in action. A Korean bunching-style jar decorated with Maori tattoo motifs, a Tang Dynasty-inspired bowl with Cherokee paddle carved textures. When asked about her process, Elena reaches for a lump of clay flecked with volcanic ash from Mexico. "Tradition isn't a cage, it's a vocabulary," she says, wedging the material to remove air bubbles. She demonstrates how Anasazi potters' coiling techniques create stronger structures for her experimental forms, while the oxide washes she uses come from a 9th century Persian manuscript she found in a university archive. "The real magic happens in the kiln," she adds, leading us to a hybrid structure that combines a Roman-style brick arch with a Navajo pit firing chamber. As temperatures climb, the minerals in her custom clay mix, local Georgia kaolin blended with crushed Portuguese limestone, react unpredictably, creating swirling patterns that look like aerial maps of the Silk Road. The challenges of such fusion work become clear when she shows us a shelf of beautiful failures. One platter warped dramatically when the Chinese porcelain clay she used conflicted with the low-temperature Mayan pigment. Another cracked where Italian terra sigillata met Japanese roku firing. "These aren't mistakes," Elena insists, running a finger along the fissures. "They're archaeological records. Every split tells me what happens when 12th century Korean glaze meets 18th century English earthenware." Her latest breakthrough came from an unexpected source, studying how Viking potters tempered clay with crushed shells to withstand freezing winters, a technique she now uses for outdoor installations in cold climates. What makes Elena's approach revolutionary isn't just the blending of techniques, but her reverence for the artisans who originated them. Before adopting any method, she spends months researching its cultural context, learning why Pueblo potters avoid wheels, how Song dynasty masters achieved their flawless celadon glazes, or what spiritual significance coiled serpents held for Minoan water vessels. "You can't just take a technique like it's a Lego piece," she warns, showing us a misstep where she initially used sacred Navajo symbols as mere decoration. The experience taught her to collaborate directly with culture bearers, leading to projects like her current series with Talavera masters in Puebla, merging their tin glazing methods with Filipino water jar forms. The most poignant moment comes when she opens a notebook filled with handwritten recipes passed down through generations of potters' worldwide formulas for glazes mixed with egg whites in medieval France, clay tempered with rice husks in ancient Vietnam, even a Byzantine kiln design that regulates temperature using strategically placed seashells. "These aren't my secrets to keep," she says, digitizing the pages for open source access. In her hands, a humble pot becomes more than art. It's a living archive, a testament to human curiosity across time and borders. As the kiln's glow illuminates her latest creation, a vessel that somehow looks simultaneously Mesoamerican, Mediterranean, and utterly new, we're reminded that the greatest traditions aren't preserved in amber, but carried forward in clay, one daring experiment at a time. A humble clay pot might seem an unlikely catalyst for global change, but the ripple effects of hybrid firing techniques have reshaped civilizations in ways we're only beginning to understand. Consider the domino effect that began when Persian cobalt pigment traveled along the Silk Road to meet Chinese porcelain clay in the 14th century. This fusion didn't just create exquisite blue and white wares, it revolutionized entire economies. The demand for these ceramics became so intense that it spurred innovations in maritime technology, as merchants needed sturdier ships to transport fragile cargo across oceans. Portuguese caravels, originally designed for exploration, were soon retrofitted with special ceramic storage holds lined with rice husks for cushioning, an early example of packaging engineering born from cultural exchange. Beyond trade, these blended techniques rewrote artistic rulebooks across continents. When Islamic potters developed tin glazing to imitate coveted Chinese porcelain, they inadvertently birthed a new aesthetic movement that would sweep through Europe. Italian artisans in Faenza adapted the technique, creating the vibrant majolica ware that decorated Renaissance palaces. The Dutch Delftware industry sprang from this lineage, its blue on-white patterns directly inspired by Ming Dynasty imports but reinterpreted through European sensibilities. Even Vermeer's iconic girl with a pearl earring hangs against a wall painted in faux Delft tiles, proof that hybrid pottery didn't just decorate homes, it transformed Western art itself. The technological spillovers were equally profound. Korean potters' development of temperature-resistant kiln shelves to withstand high-fired celadon glazes caught the attention of 13th-century ironworkers. These ceramic shelves, capable of enduring extreme heats, became prototypes for early blast furnace linings critical to advancing metal smelting. Similarly, the precise pyrometric cones developed by ancient Mesopotamians to gauge kiln temperatures laid groundwork for modern industrial thermometry. The same principles that helped potters achieve the perfect glaze consistency now ensure quality control in everything from steel production to semiconductor manufacturing. Some of history's most pivotal moments hinged on these ceramic exchanges. When the Tang dynasty began exporting porcelain to the Abbasid Caliphate, they included technical manuals translated into Arabic by court scholars. These texts didn't just teach pottery, they introduced advanced Chinese kiln designs that Middle Eastern engineers adapted for glassmaking. The resulting breakthroughs in lens grinding eventually enabled Islamic astronomers to build superior telescopes, accelerating discoveries about planetary motion that would later influence Copernicus. A chain reaction sparked by clay and fire ultimately helped reshape humanity's understanding of the cosmos. Even warfare felt pottery's hybrid influence. The sturdy stoneware fermentation jars German potters developed by combining Slavic clay mixing techniques with Roman kiln designs became the standard containers for gunpowder storage in 15th century Europe. Their non-porous walls and uniform thickness, originally perfected for brewing beer, proved ideal for preserving explosive compounds. Military historians argue this seemingly minor innovation allowed for more reliable munitions, altering the balance of power in countless conflicts. The most enduring legacy, however, might be in how these fused techniques shaped everyday life. The heat-resistant cookware that emerged from blending indigenous American pit firing with European metal handling knowledge revolutionized global cuisine. African okra stews could simmer for hours without burning. Chinese tea culture flourished with durable yixing teapots. Even the modern slow cooker owes its existence to centuries of ceramicists exchanging insulation methods across cultures. These artifacts remind us that civilizations don't advance in isolation, they're webs of borrowed brilliance. A single pot can carry the fingerprints of countless unnamed innovators, the enslaved Korean potters who brought celadon secrets to Japan, the Moorish artisans who preserved Roman kiln designs during Europe's Dark Ages, the Native American women who taught settlers how to temper clay with crushed shells. Their collective ingenuity, fired into permanence, still shapes our world in ways both visible and unseen. The next time you drink from a mug or admire a tile floor, remember, you're holding a piece of the most enduring network humanity ever built. Not the internet, not trade routes, but the endless conversation between hands shaping earth and fire across time. Every time I hold a piece of pottery with unexpected patterns or unfamiliar glazes, I wonder about the hands that shaped it and the journey it took to end up in mine. Maybe you've felt that same spark of curiosity when dusting off an heirloom bowl with motifs that don't match its supposed origin, or spotting a shard in a flea market that seems to whisper of distant lands. Those moments of connection are what make pottery so magical. It's not just about the object, but the stories it carries across generations and borders. Take Sarah from New Mexico, who wrote to us about her great-grandmother's dough bowl, passed down as Spanish colonial. For years, no one questioned its thick walls and rough texture until Sarah visited a Pueblo pottery exhibit and noticed identical coiling techniques. A local artist confirmed the truth. Her colonial bowl was almost certainly made by a Tua potter. Its design adapted to Spanish kitchen needs, but its soul undeniably indigenous. Now, every time she needs bread in that bowl, she imagines the unnamed artisan who shaped it and the quiet resilience of preserving tradition under occupation. Then there's Amir, an antiques dealer in Istanbul, who shared the tale of a tiny coffee cup that upended his assumptions. Listed in his shop as Ottoman Iznik, the cup's cobalt swirls seemed textbook until a customer from Isfahan pointed out the lotus motif hidden in the design, a signature of Persian potters working under Ottoman rule. Testing revealed something even more astonishing. The clay contained traces of Armenian volcanic ash, suggesting the cup was crafted by an Armenian artisan in a Persian Ottoman workshop. It was like holding a peace treaty in my hands, Amir told us. 3 cultures, 1 tiny vessel. Some discoveries happen by pure accident. College student Lena was digging in her grandparents' garden in rural Ukraine when her shovel struck something hard, a shattered jar with swirling green glaze. Her archaeology professor identified it as Slavic revival, where from the 19th century, imitating medieval Kievan designs but using imported Bohemian glass for the glaze. The twist, its fragments were found alongside Nazi helmet shards, suggesting someone buried it during World War II to protect it from looting. That jar survived empires and invasions, Lena said. Now it sits on my desk, reminding me that beauty persists even in brokenness. Perhaps the most moving story came from Hiroshi, a retired fisherman in Hokkaido. While repairing his nets one morning, he noticed an oddly shaped stone in the shallows which turned out to be a German-era fishing weight, its cord marks still visible after 4,000 years. But the real surprise came when researchers analyzed the clay. It matched sources from Korea's southern coast, proving ancient maritime trade long before written records. "I'd cast my nets in those waters for 60 years, Hiroshi said, voice cracking. To think my ancestors might have traded with those same shores, it made me feel part of something much bigger." Your stories remind us that pottery's magic lies in its democracy. You don't need a degree to spot the moment a Greek amphora's curve echoes a Phoenician trader's design, or to feel the weight of history in a Native American pot shard repurposed as a colonial brick. Every time someone like you pauses to question a glaze origin or trace a fingerprint in clay, you're keeping these conversations alive. So keep sharing those flea market finds and attic treasures, because the next fragment that changes our understanding of history might just be sitting on your shelf, waiting for the right pair of curious eyes to notice its secrets. As we've seen, a single pot can hold the echoes of entire civilizations, whispering secrets of collaboration, conflict, and creativity. The story of when 2 civilizations met in a single pot's firing technique reminds us that art is never isolated, it's a conversation across time. Think of the last time you held a piece of pottery, maybe a coffee mug or a flower pot, and consider how many unseen hands across how many centuries contributed to the techniques that shaped it. That humble object is a thread in a tapestry woven by countless cultures, each adding their own stitch to the design. What's extraordinary isn't just that these techniques traveled, but how they transformed along the way. A kiln design perfected in Mesopotamia might become the foundation for porcelain in China, while a glaze recipe from Persia could inspire the vibrant tiles of Andalusia. These aren't just technical borrowings, they're acts of creative courage, moments when someone looked at a foreign idea and thought, what if we tried it this way? The cracks, the imperfections, even the failures in ancient pottery often tell the most honest stories, proof that innovation has always been messy, unpredictable, and deeply human. This journey through fired clay also challenges our modern obsession with ownership and borders. When a Tang dynasty potter painted a Central Asian camel on a vase, or when a Navajo artisan blended Spanish tin glazing with ancestral designs, they weren't copying or stealing. They were participating in something far grander, the endless collective project of human ingenuity. In a world that often emphasizes division, pottery reminds us how much we've always shared, even in times of conflict or conquest. So the next time you stroll through a museum or browse a flea market, pause beside those quiet ceramic witnesses. Let your fingers hover near the glass, not to touch but to imagine. Feel the weight of those unseen hands, the heat of those long-cooled kilns, and the sparks of connection that leaped across deserts and oceans. Because every pot, from the grandest urn to the simplest bowl, is a testament to something profound. That beauty has always been a collaborative act, and that the best of humanity emerges when we're willing to learn from one another. If this journey through history has inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Who knows, the next great archaeological discovery could be yours, whether it's a family heirloom with a hidden past or a curious shard waiting in your own backyard. After all, the conversation between civilizations didn't end in antiquity. It's still happening right now in studios, classrooms, and kitchens around the world. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one to add the next